Hey, I thought I lost you there. We were going back to the slate to warn you we're on the air. I'm so glad you're with me. We have a great show today. I really feel that God's in this thing. And if you're watching today, you're asking and looking for a word. You may have got up this morning and said, Lord, I need to hear from your voice today. Well, I've got a feeling that you're going to hear from the heart of Jesus today. And I am so excited about it. If you're watching on the social platforms, share if you could. Like the program and share the program. We make some statements and we believe certain things on this program that I think is limiting our scope, that we're being throttled back a wee bit. For example, we believe that abortion is a sin, and America can kill 60 million babies and it just be brushed away. And because we speak about these kind of things on occasion, not all the time, but we've like 50,000 people on our platforms, and we checked a few weeks ago over several days, and we were reaching about 300. So they had something that wasn't normal. But if you can share, that helps us get beyond our normal scope, and it's really important. And also, if you can hit that, what do you call a button again, Andrew? The notification button. I'm not so clever as these young men around me that know all this stuff about geeky stuff. But I am so glad you're with us. I know this. I know that God is about to talk into your life. Daily Faith is here for you. Every day we're here for 1 hour to speak life and faith into your spirit. That it's not over for you. God has got something planned. God always begins resurrections. He is a resurrection God. Remember the woman Mary, who was in the garden with him, and she saw him and thought he was the gardener? She had broken that box, the alabaster box. And someone that breaks alabaster boxes is always on their way to a resurrection. And I just speak life into your spirit right now that God is on your side. And if God be for you, who can be against you? There's no weapon, say it with me, no weapon formed against me can prosper. And if you're a pastor of a church, I want you to know this, that you are loved by God. He loves you with a love that will never let you go. And if you love your pastor, you need to get in contact with him today and include him in this program, because we have a great guest. Mike Ashcraft is going to be with us, pastor of a great church called Port City Church. And we're going to be learning a lot more about him and what God's been doing in his life. And we're just looking forward to this program. Share this if you can. dailyfaith.tv is our own website, dailyfaith.tv, and you can get there without interruption anytime. And that's your way to get in contact with us if you want to write us a prayer request or just whatever. That's our website. We are so glad you're with us. I can't wait for this program today. Welcome to Daily Faith. Hey, I'm Philip Cameron and welcome to Daily Faith. I'm so glad you can be with us today. We have got a program that I believe is coming from the heart of the Father into your life. God has a purpose and a plan for you. You are not a mistake. To our young folk that we have in Moldova, the kids that we reach out to and rescue from horrendous backgrounds, terrible circumstances, the first thing they hear from us is this: if you are born, God has a plan for you. If you are born, God has a plan for you. And I'm speaking to you right now, wherever you are in this world. If you are born, God has a plan for you. And I just sense today that God has arranged our meeting for a purpose. God is the greatest conservationist the world has ever known. He never wastes anything. One of my other sayings, when pastors call me and they're going through a tough time, I'll say, listen, nothing's wasted. Nothing's wasted. The darkest moments of your life can become the foundation pillars for your future, because God has a way of working all things according to the purpose of His will and planning you. And there's nothing that you're facing just now that isn't too big for God to fix. And He just has got to allow us, and we've got to allow ourselves to trust Him and give our burdens to Him. I get up early every morning. I'm not a very good sleeper. I don't know why, but I don't sleep very well. And my grandkids, where we're living just now, we've just moved from Montgomery, Alabama up to Tennessee. We're establishing, we're building homes and stuff here. In the meantime, we're in several apartments. And my grandkids have discovered that they can come down and see Granddad at 7 o'clock in the morning and come in and they demand eggies. I'm their egg chef. Every morning at 7 o'clock I get up and I make them scrambled eggs. I make the best scrambled eggs this side of heaven, I'm telling you now. So every morning they do that. But long before they get to my door, I just open my heart and say, God, speak to me. A lot of times prayer, we tend to think that prayer is us bending God's ear. The most productive prayer you'll have is Him bending your ear. The most powerful moments in my life in experience with God is not when I've been telling Him what I want Him to do for me. The most powerful moments of my life is when He's been telling me what He wants me to do for Him. And so what I do is I literally open the old hymn, I've opened up towards heaven all the windows of my soul, and I'm living on the hallelujah side. And I just open, I say, Lord, I love you. I just spend some time praising Him. And then I say, Lord, speak to my heart. And this morning, as I was just in this time of meditation, the scripture, when the prodigal was far away, and he had been separated from his father, he was living amongst pigs. In fact, he was fighting pigs for food. That's a pretty low place. And the Bible says he'd spent all that he had on righteous living. But the truth of the matter was the boy hadn't spent everything, because there was one element inside his spirit, inside his heart, that he still knew and understood. Even though he had spent half of his father's income, his wealth, he'd wasted it. One of the translations on prostitutes and wild parties. But the thing inside that boy's heart was this: I'll go back to my dad and he'll at least make me a servant. And the Bible tells us that while he was yet a far way off, the father saw him. There's something powerful about the power of calling your prodigals home. You might be in a circumstance just now when your prodigal is lost. It may be your son or daughter. It may be a business. I don't know what it is. Maybe your health. I don't know what it is. But anticipation and faith and standing there every day. You don't happen to see your son a far way off by mistake. It was a conscious effort that father had, that he was there waiting and watching for his boy to come home. And I encourage you today, I don't know what prodigals you have in your life, but I encourage you to get up to the end of the road and stand there and say, Lord, I'm waiting here. I'm calling my harvest home. I'm calling that what I've lost back into my life. And I've got a feeling that today is going to help you focus and see the possibilities that what you've lost can come back into your life. I don't know why the Spirit spoke this so strongly to me this morning. But it's time to start calling things you've lost back. You may be at church, a pastor right now, and your church is just up in the air and you don't know what to do. It's time to start saying, God, I'm here because you called me here. I'm purposed for this moment, and I claim everything I've lost to come back into my life. And I'm going to pray with you, and I believe that today can be the turnaround day for the rest of your life. I believe with all my heart. If you've got prayer needs, please contact us, 833-DAILY-FAITH, 833-DAILY-FAITH. And someone will pray with you. And if you would like to write us, you can write us at P.O. Box 25, Clinton, Tennessee, 37716. And we love to hear from you and watch what God is doing. We are seeing great... A man called me yesterday. His name was Bodie from Arizona. And he had got sick with COVID, and the masks that he was wearing had totally destroyed his skin, and he had all kinds of growths coming in his skin. And he got a hold of me, and I called him. I just felt like to call him. And I prayed with him yesterday night. And he contacted me early this morning and said that he'd heard from whatever the organization he was trying to get to listen to his case. The next day, they contacted him and says, we want to help you and get this thing resolved. So whatever your circumstances right now, no matter how dark things are, I've got news for you. God has a plan, and God has an answer for your life. And I am so excited about that. I got a video the other day from Moldova, from a mission work there. We've a crazy thing going on in Moldova. We've been in Eastern Europe between Romania and Moldova and Ukraine for the last 33 years. And we've got a village of homes where young folk that we normally put on the street from the orphanages, we take them into us and into our homes and tell them about Jesus, put them back in school. And it's an amazing thing that's taking place. And once in a while, they'll make a video and send it to me to encourage us. And what you're about to see right now, they made by themselves, produced it, videotaped it, edited, wrote the script, spoke the words, everything you see they did. And it's an amazing story of redemption. We rescue girls and boys that are about to be trafficked, that can be lost forever into the curse of trafficking. And we tell them, if you're born, God has a plan, you're not a mistake. And the miracle of what takes place is unbelievable. Watch this video.
You start by carving out a space to build safe places for them, to regain trust in themselves and in humanity. You start by giving them a place to belong, to call home. You start by pulling out the roots of fear, of abandonment and rejection. You start by letting them know how much they matter and how loved they are. You start by showing them what love is. You start by teaching them to release the burden. It is not theirs to carry. You start by teaching them to forgive the broken people who have wronged them and to forgive themselves. You start to give them the tools to better themselves and to change their future. You start by educating and empowering them. You start by speaking truth into their potential. You start by putting candles on their birthday cakes. This is the place where the orphan's hand starts. On the other side of fear, abuse, poverty, and human trafficking stands Vatra village. Countless lives, one mission: to lift up the fallen.
Because of Vatra village, I am safe.
I have food.
I have a bed.
School to go.
A family. But most importantly, Vatra village gave us God.
This is the miracle of Vatra village. A miracle that wouldn't have been possible without your kind giving. Your care and love opened doors of hope and allowed us to rescue the perishing. You've helped the orphans' hands build these amazing homes, so please, continue to stand with us in prayer, faith, and action as we keep a light on for those that have lived in darkness for too long. You can change their life for $1 a day. Thank you for caring.
Speaking truth into their potential. What an amazing statement that is. And that's exactly what happens every day at Vatra village in Moldova. And everything we've done so far, this last year, we mainly by traveling in churches and churches becoming part with us, is how we built Vatra village. Some great churches have sponsored, and ministry have sponsored these homes. But the daily running of the place has been the miracle of people giving $1 a day. You can change a life for $1 a day. And these young folk that come into Vatra village with no hope, no possibility. In fact, this morning I got an email of a young boy who was taken to Vatra village, and his brother is a couple of years older and he didn't. And the young boy, Alexandru, came to us and said, my brother is starving. And he had the joy, Alexandru, the kid in Vatra village, had the joy today to bring his brother, who is too old and is caught up in all the mess that no hope brings. Alexander was able to bring food to his brother today because someone like you gave $1 a day. And you can help us. If you would like to pray, please, and help us to keep these doors open and help us expand. We have calls to go to Bulgaria. We have a home in Odessa with 24 kids. I mean, all of these things are looking for your help and support. And if you could help us, you can make this miracle happen. Right in the middle of this pandemic, last September, they contacted me and they says, Dad, we would like to take in, there's an orphanage 3 hours away, and there's 24 kids with nowhere to go. And in the middle of a pandemic, we were able to open up our doors to another home and take another 24 lives, 24 kids out of darkness into His marvelous light. And that takes place by you becoming a part with us. Every one of these girls you see in that video is worth $300,000 a year to a trafficker. That's how much they can make, the profit for a trafficker. And you can help us today by giving $1 or whatever. If you feel led to give a one-time gift, you can, please feel free to do that. You can contact us today, Daily Faith, P.O. Box 25, Clinton, Tennessee, 37716. Or you can go to dailyfaith.tv, and there's a place there there's a giving page there as well. And you can also give by phone, 1-833-DAILY-FAITH. Why don't you do something today? You might be in a circumstance and you're thinking, God, I need an answer from you. Well, the quickest way I've ever found to have an answer from heaven is to get involved in someone else's need. Whenever you invest and reach beyond your circumstance, you are literally reaching into God. God is looking for people that will not be controlled by their circumstance, that will recognize that their destiny is past where they're living today. You are not destined to be where you are forever. You're not a photograph that's been frozen in the circumstance you're in today. You're a video. You're moving, you're going. You're going from glory to glory, the Bible says. And don't allow the devil to lie to you, to get you stuck where you are, because that's a lie of the devil. The experience you're in right now is teaching you and training you to be better than you've ever been before. And it'll tell you where the potholes are, not to fall in again. You can make this thing, I promise you. And if you can help us, please, you can make a tremendous difference in the lives of one of these kids. Let me give you the address one more time. It's P.O. Box 25, Clinton, Tennessee, 37716. And those that give $1 a day, I've got a great book telling the story how this whole thing started. That we face in that book is my son. I found him in that orphanage, that lead paint crib that he's in. That paint on that crib was lead paint. And he chewed and teethed. He was in there from the time he was 2 weeks old. And he teethed on that crib. And God spoke to me one day. I was there with my father. My father made me go, to be quite honest with you. And I saw this wee boy standing, and the Lord said, that's your son. And that began the adventure I'm still on 33 years later. It's called Our Bummer Lamb. Watch this short video that you know exactly what a bummer lamb is. It'll help you. A lamb that has been rejected by its mother is called a bummer lamb. Once its mother abandons her lamb, it is forever. The lamb will die broken unless a shepherd rescues it. He takes the lamb into his home, feeds, cares, and redeems the broken animal. When returned to the flock, that bummer lamb never forgets the one who redeemed it. Standing abandoned in a Romanian orphanage, my wife Chrissy and I found a bummer lamb. His name was Andre. This book is the story of how a family made room for a little forsaken bummer lamb. It is the story of us all. We stand redeemed by the care of the Good Shepherd. What a story. What a story. As I'm sitting here thinking about that book, as that little video is showing, my goodness, the miracles we saw, the ridiculous miracles we saw in a communist country, still racked with revolution. Romania had gone through this horrendous revolution. They were killing kids in the orphanage. It was terrible. And I landed right in the middle of it all. They were still shooting when I went there first. And as I just had a flashback right now of the miracles, some of the crazy stuff that happened to allow us to get Andrew out. We went in I took Chrissy to meet him, and within 3 weeks of the first time she held him in her arms, 3 weeks later, I was back in America with my son. And it's a miracle. And that book will really bless your heart. Just to give you an idea, 24 kids that we just took in last September, if the traffickers had got a hold of those kids, it would have made them $7,200,000 a year for the kids we rescued in September alone. $1 a day can save them from that, and I'm so excited. And we're just so thrilled for you to be a part of it. Get in contact with us if you can. I am so excited. Listen, I don't know why, but I just feel today is going to be a day that's going to spark faith in your heart. We've got a dear friend, Mike Ashcraft, with us. He's a pastor of a church called Port City Church in Wilmington, and I just think that God has arranged this meeting for you, because God arranges special meetings. And Mike, I am so glad to have you with us today. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm very good, thanks. It's good to be with you.
Oh, I'm so glad to have you, and welcome to Daily Faith. Tell us what the Lord's been showing you about this pandemic that we're now hopefully coming to the tail end of. But you found that there's an answer and hope in the middle of all this.
Yes, I think that's been probably the biggest challenge, and the question that I get asked all the time is, how's the church doing? How are we doing? And it's, obviously something that's affected everybody across the entire world. There's literally no one who isn't affected by this. We are,
That's true.
Fortunately, we have partnerships all over the world, and you hear their stories, and in a lot of ways they're very similar. Lockdowns and masks and all the other things that have gone along with this. It was really interesting when we first started into this in late February. We began hearing. We had medical folks in our church who were talking about this and kind of asking us, and just saying, hey, this is what we're hearing. Do you guys have any plans? We're a relatively large church in a very small town. And so that was part of the reach out to us, was like, you're going to have 1,500 people in a room. There's threat of spread. And, it was interesting that the series that I was just about to begin in March was called Hope in the Dark. And it was literally about how do we hold on to hope, or how is hope made available when you just flat can't see what's in front of you, and did not see any of this coming. And then, of course, the series launched on the first day that we had suspended our gatherings. And, and it was one of those moments where, we didn't know it was going to be a year or longer. I think we were getting ideas it wasn't going to be a couple of weeks, but we had no idea it was going to be a year. And I remember, the mantra was, whenever you get in situations or circumstances that you don't like, or they're unfamiliar or uncomfortable, our greatest tendency is to get out from underneath them. And so we will almost do anything. And then we start saying things like getting back to normal. We want to get back to normal. And what happens is then it all seems as though it's a waste, that the journey is a waste. And then you look back and you say the entire year was a waste. Yeah. And we were, in Romans 8 is where the series was sparked from, which is that the world groans. The world is been subjected to futility by God himself, that there's a longing that we have. And that what we landed on, what we try to encourage, is that hope looks like patience. And it's our willingness to walk through whatever God allows. Yes. And we do that by trusting him and with faith and not being shaken. And, I found myself having to, preach that to myself, having to remind myself of that, and then to lead our entire staff and church with that same message. Remember, we said this, in March, that God doesn't waste anything in these moments, these days, when we feel like it's futile and it has no purpose, that God's promise of redemption means that there is nothing that is outside of his, his ability to redeem for his beautiful purposes and his call on our lives. So, we've been holding fast to that, and in ways it's been extremely difficult, and in ways we have found tremendous beauty in what he's done in this season.
I have a saying that I speak constantly to those around me and people in my life: nothing is wasted. Nothing is wasted. And the devil would try to tell us. I mean, early in the morning, I was watching the news, and this guy was saying that we've wasted a whole year of our children's lives because they haven't been in school for a whole year, and this has been wasted. I've got news for you. God is the Redeemer. His nature is redemption. And that's just everything God sees. Years ago, my dad bought an old Volvo. It was it was a bus of a car. I mean, when these things, it was a 144. I don't know if you know Volvos, and he bought
have
it from.
one.
You do? Well, he bought one from
A
this
night-
fisherman, and the bodies were terrible in Scotland because of the salt air and there was rust.
Yep.
So my dad said to me one day, he said, I'm going to get this car resprayed. I says, Dad, the car, it's not worth respraying for. Oh, no, I'm going to fix this car. So he spent hundreds and hundreds of pounds. And the guy that was going to do the body work said, I'm going to put a Rolls Royce finish on this car. So my dad came back to me and says, he's going to put a Rolls Royce finish on the car. I'm saying, the car is a pile of junk. It's an old car. So he didn't pay any attention to me. So one day the car was ready and he went down and picked it up and he drove it out to our home. And he stepped out the car, his chest puffed up. He says, look at this car. It was stunning. And I said, how much did it cost? And he told me. So I'm looking across the roof of the car at him, eye to eye across the car. And I'm saying, you have wasted hundreds and hundreds of pounds. And I'm going at him how, you'd have. And I looked up and he was weeping. And I stopped. I says, oh, what's wrong, Dad? He says, you don't know the joy I have of taking something that no one else wants and making it precious again. Mm-hmm. And that moment, I recognized a redeemer spirit. And that's what God's all about. God is in the redeeming business. That's what he does.
Yeah. So it's so funny because I have a 1989 Volvo that I still drive. It's got 360 something thousand miles on it.
Oh, it needs a paint job.
It actually got one. It looks really good. It looks really good. But what's funny is what makes it like, this is what I think is so interesting. It's a beautiful story. And what makes things redeemable is not just their beauty, it's their use.
Yeah. And
one of the things that I think as Americans, and we live in Western culture, so it's very efficient. It's very driven by logic, right? So it's A plus B equals C, and we often identify things as problems, and problems require solutions.
Yeah.
And then in a problem economy or in a problem mindset, everything is about avoiding problems and making sure that we don't have anything that goes wrong.
That's good.
And what God's promise actually is it's not a solution-based mindset. It's a redemption-based mindset, which means he takes things that are broken and he takes things that are, one of my favorite, verses about the gospel is found in Genesis, the end of Genesis. And it's when Joseph encounters his brothers and they're, his father has died and they're afraid, now you're going to get us back. And he says, what you intended for harm, God intended for good. And I think that's and it was decades of his life.
Yeah.
It wasn't a moment. It wasn't even a season. It was almost his entire life that would be used to bring redemption generations from now. And so I think a lot of times what happens in our cultures, we're so focused on the quickest way to a solution that we lose the fact that God isn't always interested in solving our problems. He's interested in redeeming what has been intended to harm or to hold back or to undermine. Absolutely. And that the implications aren't recognized in weeks or months. Sometimes they're actually recognized in generations. Wow. And I think if we can get our eyes fixed on what his promise for us actually is, we realize that this groaning of creation actually is the grinding nature in which we learn how to live in a rule and a reign that his kingdom provides for us, that is always redemptive. And we get to be participants in pockets of that redemption. What your dad did for the car, what you do and participate in for the orphans is taking things that are broken or lost or seen as something less and saying, no, they actually have purpose and use within God's care in his hand. And to me, that's one of the most, beautiful things. And it's everywhere if we have eyes to see. And I think that's what God invites. My prayer is, God, let me see, help me to see, because I know sometimes what I see is discouraging. And sometimes what I see makes me want to give up. But when I begin to ask to see how you see, to see with the eyes of my faith, really these pockets and these places of redemption and his work is literally everywhere.
What you're talking about, Mike, is kingdom thinking. God's
100%.
kingdom works on a totally different paradigm than man's kingdom. We live in America in particular in a throwaway society. If it doesn't work, and throw it out. We had a bathroom put in the apartments we're staying in just now, and the electrician wired them wrong. So when we plugged in the washers, 2 washers, both of them blew up. So we sent to get them fixed, and the fella came and he put a board in it, and he says, I put that in there, but it's also fried the motor. He says, look, it's not worth it. He says, just throw it out. And we had to throw out two perfectly good, everything looked fine except the motor or whatever, because we live in a throwaway society. God does not think that way. God's kingdom is about redemption and restoration.
Yeah. We talked about this in our church. We've been talking about this idea of reordering, and that's been one of the big themes, because one of the things the pandemic did was it reordered, it forced us to reorder our priorities. It forced us to reorder what we saw. There were a lot of things that we were used to were just taken away. And, one of the phrases we talked about this idea that when it's interesting that when Leviticus, the law was given, it was given as the Israelites were leaving generations of bondage in Egypt, and they were heading into the promised land. They weren't there yet. It was in that middle journey. And then Leviticus reads so detailed, and it reads so, like tedious. And what there's a lot to it, but the way I summed it up is essentially it was given as a reordering that you have to, when you move out of one thing and into something new, the greatest temptation that we often face in moving into something that is new and uncertain is to go back to the way things were. And I think that's what the pandemic, the threat of coming out of the pandemic is. We want to return to normal. And what's interesting, what the Israelites said in their Exodus is they get up and they said, Moses, we had 3 square meals a day in Egypt. Did you bring us out here to die? And it's like we start longing for even familiar misery. Like we long for things to be the way that they were, even if it wasn't what we wanted. It's better than the sense of unfamiliar. And what it is having to trust. And I think what we realize is that God's ways are radically different than ours. And it takes us a very long time, and it takes a lot of intentionality for us to adapt to life in his kingdom. And, we talked about it like this. We said, it took just 3 days, just a few days to get the Israelites out of Egypt. It took 40 years to get Egypt out of the Israelites.
Yes.
And a lot of times, our own flesh and our own being accustomed to the way we operate and deal with, it takes a long time for those patterns to die, right? To go away, so that we re-enter into this new way that God has made available for us now. And, what I think is so important is that's what the power of the moment is. This isn't about making a promise to God to do something, for 60 days or for 100 days or next year. It's about right now in this moment. Can I be faithful? Can I hear and sense what you're asking me to do? And just to rest that your grace is sufficient in this moment for whatever circumstance I'm facing, trusting and believing that he'll use it for his redemptive purposes and the fullness and freedom he longs and has actually made available for me in the gospel.
It's hard to imagine that the children of Israel wanted to go back to slavery. They wanted to give up their liberty just to get back to normal. And one thing I've said over and over again coming out of this pandemic, and while we're in the middle of the pandemic, the old normal will never be again. What's happening, I'm hearing pastors as they speak with me, they're telling me that church attendance, although the finances have maintained in the church, the attendance has slipped. And to get people back out of the habit of sitting in their pajamas watching the service from home, that's how do you break that to get them back into the habit? And I said, guys, I don't know if that ever will change. I think you're going to find within the church that the core of people that God's going to restore and build through again, and build the church back out through those that are radical and involved in serving the Lord. and you're going to have a lot of spectators just watching and saying, well, I'm just happy to be here, and I can sit here and watch you, just before I go and play tennis or go out in the boat or whatever. And we need to understand that where we're moving forward is to seek God's face for the future and not be looking backwards. Because I've learned this: if you try and walk forwards backwards, you're going to bump into something and trip up eventually. Yeah. And it's never a good plan.
But Philip, I think too, you obviously are a visionary with just what you've brought, and being in Romania and seeing Moldova and seeing so many things that you've seen. And I tend to be a big picture guy personally. Like that's my natural my natural view. I studied. I was telling some of our college students, I studied architecture. That's my background, and so this is back in the 90s before you could create computer models that people could walk through. So you're basically walking people into something that they really can't see until it is actually built.
Sure.
But one of the things I think that, what I found in my own journey is the longer I do something, my tendency is to hold on. Like you get something to a point, whether it's your church or your ministry, and you know how things work, and you can feel that pressure from everybody around you. And, so in a lot of ways I try to go, I'm just as prone as the Israelites, right? Like, let's just go back to this instead of really having the courage and actually fresh faith to step into things that are uncertain.
Fresh faith. Ooh, that's powerful. We need fresh faith.
Yeah. And I'm learning that, and I'm learning how to lead in that. And we're because you can just feel the pressure, especially as things now in our when everything was taken away and we couldn't do all the programs that we're used to doing. The services are digital. Our whole children's ministry, had to pivot and recalibrate, and it was very effective. But then as things start to open up, you can just feel the pressure of everybody to go back to the way things were. And what we're having to do is to really say, okay, what are the things that we have valued about this season? How do we elevate those? And then make sure that we're arranging all the things that we're doing to preserve and to advance, leverage the lessons that we've learned. And that's a skill set, and it's an intentionality that doesn't happen naturally. Because I think our natural tendency is to go back to what we know how to do and then to make it so. And so we're at a really steep learning curve in this season with trying to really leverage what we've learned and what we feel like God has done, and really build the church. I think it's an opportunity to actually relaunch the church in ways that we just would never have had the pandemic not occurred.
What you're saying is so absolutely correct. And this new curve, my opinion is, this new curve that the church is now into is going to be more important than what we were when we came out, when we fell into the pandemic, because what we determine going forward is how we will exist for decades to come. And that is a real challenge of faith. And I want to encourage folk watching just now, understand this, that God has everything under control. And I'm astonished at the new levels of revelation that He can bring to us in these days. And a lot of times we go through a crisis. In fact, I wrote a book one time called The Creativity of the Crisis. And sometimes it is the crisis that get you off your seat. It's the crisis that get you thinking and reevaluating all the things in your life to say, okay, then where are we now and what do we do to move forward? And I really sense, Mike, that this is going to be taking place in the next few months in the church, because I don't think that the church, the numbers that were there in the beginning, I believe we'll get back to that, but it'll be new, different kind of people. It'll be fresh folk that I hope are saved. We need to start getting involved. One of the subjects I speak on continually is household salvation. We need to have a wave of salvation in the churches in America, that we're not taking church people from this church and taking them to our church, and they bring with them all the problems for the old church into the church we're in right now, and it just continues to fester and grow. We need to have a revival of salvation, household salvation. The greatest harvest field in your world is your family. And if we can have God's mind in this thing. The Bible says, my thoughts are not your thoughts. God's ways are not our ways. And we've got to get the mind of Christ in this whole thing. And I know the mind of Christ in this, that while He was While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And if we can focus on the fact is getting back to the gospel, getting back to this, the point of salvation, the redemption point, that a church can really grow and move forward.
Yeah, I feel like the two things that were really, really helpful, and I think you're right. The church is not going to be the same, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
It was really interesting that when we were thinking about how we leveraged for about 5 years, maybe longer, probably more like 8 years, we've been talking about attendance and why attendance either matters or doesn't matter, because that's how every church met. When people say church growth, and I assume there's a lot of pastors that are watching you, when we talk about church growth, almost always people mean, what's your budget and how many people come to your church?
Yeah.
And I go to a lot of conferences. That's what they always ask. How big is your church? And I'm kind of going, okay, does that really matter? Like, how important? I mean, I guess it makes you feel better. Like people like to hear you preach, or maybe you have great programs, or there's a lot of reasons why. And we began to ask why, like, why does attendance matter? And what is that someone who is locked into your church, really, serving, and maybe they're working with a marriage ministry and they're helping marriages, heal, and they're working on that, but they miss a Sunday or two because they're traveling somewhere or whatever. Their engagement is still high, even though they didn't, quote, attend church on Sunday. But someone who just walked in those doors and they felt like they weren't condemned, and they felt like that the walls didn't come down. They said, oh my gosh, I've not been to church. I don't know Jesus. Them coming back next week is 100% of their engagement. So those two things, even though it's the same number on a attendance sheet, mean very different things to that person and to us as a church in terms of how we disciple people. And one of the things that the pandemic has done is it just took attendance off the table.
It did.
And now we're having to rethink, what are we doing to engage people in terms of our mission and vision to actually make disciples and to create a very intentional, formative process, by which, and I agree, the salvation piece is so important. But what I think a lot of churches do, and I think it's an incomplete thing, is when we make salvation the end, like the victory point, we just treat it as just the beginning point. When you find Jesus, you're beginning. And that's when we actually get to fulfill our mission and vision. And so it's a radically different way of thinking about, and also, I want to say measuring. I don't like that word, but measuring and trying to understand what God is actually doing in the lives of the individual people, and then collectively as his body that we're responsible for.
Yeah, that's fine. Of course, salvation is the beginning point. But a lot of times,
a lot of people don't treat it that way.
No, I know. But a lot of times, what we do is we skip that completely, and the church has existed on new folk coming from other churches, and they bring 100%. With them all the stuff from the past, and so we've got to get that balance between the new folks coming in. I mean, that's a tremendous comparison between one that's working in the church and they've missed a couple of Sundays, to someone that's coming in for the first time that's got really no investment in the church. They're just there, and and you count them both the same, and that is just not the case. They're totally different value systems.
One of my favorite stories, and part of why we've wrestled with this, and we wrestle. We have a lot of people come, and we have music, and we work hard to do it well. I mean, we're not indifferent to that. But we had a lady, one of our parking volunteers was out in the parking lot helping people park, and he saw a lady standing over by her car, and she got out of her car, and he could tell she was kind of visibly like unsure. It's like, well, do you not know where to go, or what's going on? He walked over to her and says, ma'am, can I help you? And she says, I don't think I can go in. And she was basically coming out of a really bad background, a lot of prostitution, a lot of just really, really terrible stuff that she was involved in. She was just utterly ashamed of herself. And he said, ma'am, you can go in. And he left his spot in the parking lot, and he walked her in with a couple of our host team. Wow. And he sat with her in the service. Said through the music, she's just crying. And she looks over at him, and she says, I can't believe you let people like me in here. And he turns around. What he said was so beautiful. He said, ma'am, we're all people like you. And, in that moment, I thought that's exactly why attendance, though, that's why people coming to church matters. Because when people walk in those doors and they realize that they're not condemned and they, wherever they might be, that like don't make any mistake, Jesus is a king and he demands our allegiance, and he doesn't play when it comes to what he demands from us. But what he is he meets us exactly where we are.
Absolutely.
And his grace is sufficient for that. And when you see that modeled, you recognize that number isn't like a number on an attendance chart. It's a person whose story actually matters, and not only matters to that person, but it matters to all the people around them when they go, oh, I met God when I was at my lowest. I didn't have to clean myself up. He found me and he rescued me. And now this is what's happening. This is what God's doing to redeem me. And that's one of the things I just don't ever lose sight of that when I think about people coming to our church. Yeah, thank you. It's beautiful.
Story. That is unbelievable. I often speak when I'm in churches and we go and help churches and church growth and stuff. And one of the things that I talk to them all the time is ramp ministries, RAMP, reaching and mentoring people. Reaching and mentoring people. And we've got to be able in the church to create ramps out to where they are. So a lady in the parking lot that has come from a horrendous background can find a place on a ramp. This table that sits in front of me, I couldn't jump from the floor up to it. But if you build me a ramp, I can get up here in a wheelchair. And the church has got to understand that we're living in a sick world. And we can be so correct in our presentation that folk like this woman you're talking about is sitting thinking, well, there's no place in this place for me. But the great thing about the gospel is, whether you're a woman with the issue of blood, or whether you're Bartimaeus, or whatever you are, Jesus went to find them where they were. And I believe that is a key, a real key and principle to pastors getting back into whatever the future is going to be. We've got to be able to find a way to get folks that have no contact, a ramp, a means by which they can begin the process of finding the Lord. That's what a story.
It's both. It's come and see, but it's also go and get. The thing when the church is successful in terms of attracting people, you get a little passive. And we did this, right? This is what happened to us. We just got passive because people were coming.
Sure.
And what I felt like God was doing in our church is we need to start becoming really aggressive and not obnoxious, but with going into the world and reaching people. And both of those things are important. It's not one or the other. It's both of them. And it's transformed who we are. And then the pandemic has sort of heightened some things and really allowed us to learn that personal approach to really, reaching out with a phone call, getting on a Zoom call, even now, now FaceTime, things like that, where we're actually connecting with people far more relationally than we've been able to do when we just have a bunch of people in a room.
It has to be relational. It has got to be to a point now. It used to be in the old world a year ago. It seems like a century ago in some ways. But it used to be that if a church had its programs together and there was a good, strong word, folk would come. I believe that the whole thing is going to change into relationships. I believe that God is going to allow the church. Back in Scotland, when I was raised, the church that we had, we had a bunch of drunkards and got saved, and then got baptized in the Holy Spirit and didn't even know what it was until we found other people subsequently that they were also Pentecostal, and we didn't know this existed. But what happened was we had a ministry in the church that I was raised in, and it was a body ministry. So everyone that went to church on any service had the potential of being invited up to share a testimony or a word or a thought. And what that did was it made the whole church aware that you had to have something to say. As a young boy, I remember, because my dad was the pastor, and he would say to me, "Philip, come up and tell us what the Lord's doing in your life." So I'd go up and I would say, "I'm glad I'm saved, and by His grace I mean to go on." And he would say, "That's not good enough. Tell us what the Lord's doing in your life." So what it did was it made all of us. I knew the Psalms very well because you could always get a good thought out of the Psalms really quick. You wouldn't have to read the Psalms for a long time. You think, I'll talk on that if I'm asked to speak. But not so much testifying from a platform. But if we can get the whole church in that ready mode in their spirits to be instant in season and out of season, to be the connection between the person that's in the parking lot wondering whether or not I should go in, or that we've got to become more connective in the world we live in, and that is, I think, what God's going to do through the church.
Yeah, and it's that I love that, it's that ability to articulate what God is doing. I remember, when I keep a journal, so I'm a chronic journaler. I'm not a good writer, but I like to write. I actually don't like to write. I write as a discipline because it helps me to think.
I know. Yeah.
And I already said it's what a tragic thing, encounter with God, and to fail to write it down, to only recall that it is good. And the way I think about this is, I love Food Network, and you watch all these guys on these cooking shows, and when they taste food, they taste it and they'll tell you like, oh, that's acidic, or that's bitter, or that's assertive. Yeah. They have all these really, really descriptive words for what they're tasting. And what I realize is I've kind of had a diet of like a 7th grade boy. So like, you give me something, I'm like, it's either good or bad. That's the only standard I know. And what I realize is I'm actually not tasting it. I'm just assessing whether I like it or not. And I think that's what a lot of people do with God. They just, the scriptures like, taste and see that the Lord is good, which requires us to use words to describe what we're sensing. And it is a discipline. It's a discipline to say, the Lord moved in me, and this is what I felt. Was it conviction? Was it comfort? Was it, what am I feeling? What am I sensing that God is saying or doing or leading me to, instead of, oh, I had an encounter with God, it was really good. Or I had an encounter with God, it was really hard, challenging. But like, what was it about it that moved you? Or what was it about it that is forming you or shaping you? Because that's what he's doing, right? He says, I'm confident in this very thing, that he who has begun this work is 100% faithful to complete it until that day. And so every day every moment, there's something that's happening in me that's significant in terms of who I'm becoming. Absolutely. And I just think we need space and tools that help us to pay attention to that. Awareness is growth. It's a good line.
Awareness is growth. So when you become aware of stuff, when you suddenly connect, I've got some grandkids, I've got 6 grandkids, and Rowie his birthday and my birthday is on the same day. And when he was born, he had all kind of medical issues.
You said birthday?
What's that?
It's a birthday?
Birthday.
You call it a birthday? A birthday. I thought you said a birthday. I was like, oh, that's a cool way to say
listen,
it.
Now, don't start picking on us because of my accent here. You're going to make me self-conscious being a Scotsman. Anyway, he and I share the same birthday. And so he always hangs out with me. I'm the egg chef. He's the one that comes in and says, Granddad, I want some eggies. That's what they get every morning. And the other day, so he's learning to read right now. He's just in the beginning of learning. He's done his ABCs and stuff, and he's now putting words together. So to drive down the road with him is an experience, because he reads everything. And he starts, and he'll mispronounce a thing, and you'll watch him speak it over in his mind, and then he'll get to close enough or whatever, and I'll tell him what it was. And the other day he was sitting behind me in his chair that he sits in, and he looked out the window, and we passed a place called Crown Plaza. And he looked for a second, he said, Granddad, see that word there? He says, if you take the A from the line below it and put it up, that will spell Rowan. C-R-O-A-N, the crown. By adding an A, it made it Rowan. And I'm thinking, I said, you are so smart. Because what happens is, that your awareness to what's happening in your world, like Rowan learning to read, God is interested in developing the awareness in us